Thanks, folks, for joining us. I haven't started the meeting yet. We have one board member. Come on in. Not to put you on the spot. We have one board member here who is calling in remotely. I want to make sure we have a sound check right now. Mary Joy Reinarts is calling in. Mary Joy, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but Mike has to put me on speaker.
Yes, go ahead. See if we can talk again and see if the audience can hear you.
Okay, I got it. It's good.
All right, we can hear you. You can hear us. Great. Wonderful. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Sorry we were a little delayed after the holiday. We had a lot to chat about just before the meeting. But could I also ask you all to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? All right. Thank you very much. As I said, we have one board member tuning in remotely this evening. We already did our sound check to verify that we can hear each other. And we have two board members absent this evening. Ms. Torba and Dr. Wack could not join us. They had professional conflicts. So that brings us on our agenda to visitor comments. I'm glad to see we have a nice crowd this evening. I will be looking at, let's see, and if I don't call your name, if this isn't up to date by the time I'm done, let me know that you've signed in and we'll still have a chance to have you address the board with your name and everything else. But first I have Amy Villani would like to address the board. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Hi, I'm the mom of a senior as well as an 8th grader in Southern Lehigh.
Hold on 1 second. You have plenty of time. Let's see if that mic is on and make sure you can be heard in general.
It's always so fun to go first.
Yeah, right. We're good.
Thanks. Okay, so my name's Amy Villani, and I'm the mom of a senior as well as an 8th grader here. And I came tonight to talk about if the school board would possibly look into putting more resources behind college preparedness. So I really feel like there's such a difference between kids who have parents who are able to hire outside resources and who know about what to do to be able to apply for college. My parents were immigrants. I had absolutely no idea. I have no idea how I got into Villanova or stayed there, but it happened for me. And I really feel like it's something that's really ignored here. And specifically in the past year, I feel like a lot of the kids that should have gotten into schools didn't get into them. And I also feel like Southern Lehigh lacks in the amount of kids that get into Ivy Leagues. I've watched it for years and talked to a lot of people that are, more in the know than I am about that. I've done some research over the past couple days, and it seems as though a lot of the high schools have a college resource center. I'm just wondering if I understand nobody wants to spend any extra money. I totally get that as a taxpayer. I think it's super important. I think it would be nice. All of the parents pretty much agree that there's one extremely strong person who, if you're lucky enough to get her like we were, and I just don't think it's fair that she's very, very responsive. And I think it makes a lot of sense in the business world and here that if you have somebody that's showing that they have a lot of strength in one area, that you pull them and you have them work with juniors and, maybe have some workshops for the kids to go to. I feel like there's a lot more that I feel like you all do so much. I'm not saying you don't, but I just feel like there's a lot more that we could do. And I feel like Southern Lehigh is just very, very behind where Liberty High School is, Penn Ridge, Freedom High School. I've been going on websites and it seems like more high school have these programs for the 11th graders than don't. So that's my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. All right, the next visitor comment is Jamie Caverly.
Sorry, the tickle. Good evening and Happy New Year. My name is Jamie Caverly, and I have 2 kids currently in the district. One will be starting in 2 years. As I looked at tonight's agenda for the meeting, there is a very carefully thought out presentation about the budget for next year, which I appreciated. I would really like for you, though, to look at the elementary class sizes, specifically kindergarten. I believe that some of this was brought up during the education committee meeting, which I apologize for missing. I love being a part of that meeting, and that Monday just happened, and don't know where I was. But that being said, I know class sizes are always an issue and will always be an issue no matter what. But having 22 kindergartners in an already half-day program seems like a very high number. Trying to engage and meet all these needs of the students in only 2.5 hours equates to approximately 6.8 minutes per student that the teacher could get to them. Putting that in the number in mind seems absolutely crazy to think about. So I'd really like you to look at those kinds of figures to see where there might be needs at for across the whole board. It is appreciated that our district does cap the class sizes at 26. And looking at those numbers, most of the class sizes are under that. I just worried about the housing development that keeps growing like wildflowers, and kind of anticipating that students will also come with those houses. So I look forward to hearing the discussions for tonight, and thank you.
Thank you for your comment. All right, those are the only visitor comments I have signed up for this evening. Did I miss anyone who thought they signed up in the audience? All right, wonderful. The laptop will remain up. We have another visitor comment session at the end of our meeting if you wish to sign up to speak then. And that concludes our visitor comment for this evening. So we will move into our agenda, right into superintendent and district updates. Dr. Mahan. Looks like we have a presentation
We do.
we're queuing up for.
We do.
All right.
Eric, do you give me casting here? I'm not seeing. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Let's make sure it comes up.
Let's hope. All right, there it is. Okay. All right. So good evening, everyone. And as always, school board members, I want to begin. Yes, I can.
Ms. Renner's just asked if she could be taken up to the podium so she could hear. Maybe adjust your mic. If she can't hear you on the line, Mike, maybe it's because the microphone isn't quite
Yes, very good.
honed that one
How's
in.
that? Is this, are we coming through? Okay. So I have a presentation tonight talking about planning with respect to program staffing and budget. But before I get going, I do want to acknowledge that January is School Board Member Appreciation Month. So I want to take the occasion to thank our school board members for your many hours of service. I always say that there are many, many, many forms of service that individuals can choose. There are few that are more difficult and few that are more valuable than the service that you give to this community and these school districts. So I thank you. We'll have maybe a more formal discussion or action later in the month at our regular meeting, but I did want to mark the occasion by thanking you for your service on this school board director month in January. So I want to kind of talk about the 25-26 budget in the context of planning for our programs and some strategic thinking, both intermediate and long-term. And so budgeting really is a 12-month process. So we talked to Mr. Pepe. When does the budget start? It never ends. All right. But a point of demarcation, a very important one, is when we have our audit presentation from the final year. And tonight we have with us Mr. Chris Bentley, who's going to do a presentation and present our audit from last year. And one of I think the cornerstones of successful budgeting process is that of listening. And one of the things that I hope to bring out in this presentation and in the process as we go forward is a greater emphasis this year on the process of listening. And that's in part from feedback that we received last year, where we have very good technical budgets, but opportunities to listen and for input, I think needed to be expanded. And this presentation is hopefully trying to lay a framework for that type of a process. And so when it comes to the budget and program planning associated with it, I believe there are three looks that I have here. First, a look back at actual prior results. Like, how have we done? What do the numbers say? Where have we been? The second is to say, all right, where are we now? What are our programs? How are our operations? And to what extent do they meet our needs? And to what extent do they not? And then to make adjustments. And then finally, budget really is an opportunity for strategic planning. How do we allocate our resources to position ourselves moving forward to get the maximum value driven to our students? And so that's kind of the approach that I would wish to take, and the structure of this presentation tonight. Our administration is committed to support the board's critical work in adopting a 25-26 budget. And then the following charts and graphs in this presentation focus on financials, but also reflect an exciting and ongoing work and opportunity for us on our goals and initiatives. And more information will certainly be presented in the coming months to the board, its committees, and to its stakeholders, right? Ultimately leading to what we hope to be an approval of a budget in June. Okay? So, getting to those actual results, right? In each of the past 4 years, Southern Lehigh has finished with a surplus. The surplus in 3 of those last 4 years has been quite significant, and the district has leveraged the fund balance to make substantial investments in student programs, in infrastructure and facilities. And I hope to be able to kind of quantify some of that work in subsequent slides here. And getting to a bit of specifics, and certainly Chris can address these better than I can, but in the last 3 audited years, fund balance has increased by a total of about $15 million, right? The most recently audited year, which we're going to be investigating tonight in the audit report, generated a surplus of $6 million, right? And while that's great, right? Southern Lehigh is not a bank or an investment fund. We are a school district, and to the extent that we're successful, it is how do we drive out those funds to advance our educational and operational priorities. And finally, when it comes to kind of the actuals, I think one of the often under-focused areas of budget analysis is debt profile, all right? Because, your revenues matching all that is very important, but oftentimes districts will find there are things hidden in their debt profile where there are jumps in expenses going forward because of decisions that were made 15 or 20 or as many as 30 years ago. And so I thought I would present to the board tonight a look at our debt profile, which is very optimistic. It is very optimistic. We pay each year about $6.5 million to service our debt for buildings that were built and bonds that were issued in prior years, some many years ago. But as you can see, right, there are no bad surprises going forward. And in fact, when we hit 2030, 2031, which seems far, but really isn't, right, we have a substantial reduction in our debt profile. And then going into 2031, 2032, it comes down to even a smaller number. And I'll just kind of take a brief digression. We did recently, at least during my time here, take an $8 million bank loan. And we did so cautious about the impact of debt and recognizing that we really did not need to take the loan. It is something we could have done and managed with our fund balance, because we're very cautious about debt for this very purpose. But it happened that the interest rates that we incurred on the loan that we then used to fund our stadium project and other projects was higher than the funds we would have otherwise used in our fund balance. So actually it made good sense for us to pay for projects with our loan instead of our fund balance because of the difference in interest rates. So while that is a debt that we have taken on, it was very strategic in the way we did it. And actually very fortunate too in the way that the market conditions had changed suddenly to our favor. So if we look again in totality as to where we stand right this minute, looking back at recent years' performance, right? Operational revenue exceeds operational expense by a lot, actually. So it's a great thing, right? Non-recurring revenues are utilized for non-recurring expenses. Yes, right? Very cautious. And our debt profile is regular and it's manageable. And in fact, it's much better than that. It's very favorable to us. So when we look at those three indicators, it's my view that Southern Lehigh is positioned to determine and to advance its programmatic and operational initiatives. We are approaching this budget and our programs from a position of strength, and that's exciting. But how do we then translate that strength into really good things for our kids is the question. So funds have been utilized. As I said, we're not trying to be a bank here, right? We're not trying to be a hedge fund. We're trying to do good things with the money and leverage the assets that we have. And so funds have been utilized to improve our physical infrastructure and to advance our curricular initiatives, focused on supporting the work of our professional staff and increasing opportunities for our students. And that's a big statement. You say, well, how have you been doing that, right? And the how is through curriculum, through safety, through technology, infrastructure, and through physical infrastructure. And I'm going to take a moment to show a brief chart on each of these categories. First and most important is our instructional and curricular projects, right? And all told, in recent years, both having spent and planning for the immediate future, we've spent about $1.3 million on these projects. We have introduced and actually well-established structured literacy in our elementary schools, which we believe over time will have an enormously positive impact. And we've also then revamped and reorganized our curriculum across the district. That work is still continuing, and noting particular focus will occur on science standards as we go forward. And I also put in here some question marks because we have to make decisions together about all-day K, right? That will be a decision we have to make if we have it, and to the extent we have it, it's something we will have to fund and support. Professional development is always an issue as to how do we utilize our funds to support the work of our teachers through professional development. And I'm sure there are other things that as we move through this budget process that we will like to explore and consider in the areas of instructional and curricular projects. So maybe I'll just pause for a sec. I should have paused before I got to the charts, but any questions or discussion, or shall we just continue on? Okay. All right. The next area is safety. And while this number is not a big one, I thought I would highlight it. Just today, we got, with thanks to Dr. Trinkle, our new radios for a repeater system that we have here across the campus. And we've upgraded with cameras and monitors and some miscellaneous training that has gone on. So while 140,000 is not a giant number, it's a real number. And I put it there because safety is always something that is first and foremost in our mind. And to the extent that there are needs beyond what the 140,000, that we'll meet them because it is the very high priority.
Just
Okay.
one thing quickly
Yes.
there. That number is actually larger by $1 million because you've got other things in another page here with regard to JPLIS improvement on the facade. So
Right.
it's safety as well.
Well, yes. And I hadn't categorized it that way, but you are correct. That is true. We've improved the safety in that respect. Thank you, Mr. Mon.
Could I ask you a quick question about
Yes.
that number? With that safety figure, I see the notation partially offset by grants. Is
Yes.
that the total inclusive of school funds and grant funds, or is that the portion of school funds that we use to pay?
That's inclusive of grant and school funding.
Thank you.
Yep.
One other thing I wanted to bring up here in
Yes.
terms of, being a PPL employee, and if I didn't talk about safety here, I feel like I'd be doing
Right.
wrong against myself here. But from a school's perspective, and I know we can't talk about specifics when it comes to safety, but I know we made these advancements and these improvements in these areas.
Mhm.
Is there something in place that we have to where we're actually looking and measuring ourselves and against other districts in terms of what kind of measures and stuff are in place otherwhere that maybe for strategic planning as the theme tonight that we can look to improve here at the school district? I'm sure there's areas to improve. Just
Yes.
where are they? Who
we-
else is doing things differently than we are, potentially,
Yeah,
or vice versa?
Yeah, we are very much. I know once a month we have the coordinator meetings that Dr. Trinkle attends that compares. We also have meetings with our law enforcement every month here. We are very much engaged. They are very much present with respect to safety inspections and all those kind of things. And there are some things that other districts do that we purposefully choose not to do, and there's some things that we do that other districts do not. And again, we're very happy to discuss those, but perhaps not in this particular context.
And just also speaking as the IU representative, I know that there's a collective that many schools take advantage of trainings and resources, a software program, Navigate, I believe we use, so that the entire district can, and that's constantly being looked at, so the entire district can communicate in case any broadcasts need to be made, or it's an easy system to keep track of. And we're working on modifying and always improving that as well. I know I talked to Dr. Trinkle recently about that. So.
She's been a lead advocate among the members of the IU in trying to better improve those functionalities that we use here in the school district. Right? That's a diplomatic way to say, I think Dr. Trinkle has been forcing some movement on the part of this program that's not been doing us a very good job. Right? So thank you to Dr. Trinkle there. With respect to technology, we've spent a significant amount of funds to upgrade our technology. We've had server virtualization. We've very much revamped our internet infrastructure, both with switches and access points. We've upgraded our phone system. Our printers, through the leadership of Mr. Pepe, have all been replaced because they were actually well past their anticipated life cycle. And we're replaced student devices this year, or excuse me, staff devices this year, and our technology committee is looking very closely and not too far from decision-making territory when it comes to devices for our students for next year. So we have definitely spent money on technology because it's a critical component for our teachers and our operation. And then finally, the last area of investment, so to speak, is in our physical facilities. $20 million, right? That has been a lot. And you know, you're very familiar with the stadium project and the exterior wall project, HVAC, which was offset in part by federal funds. We have about $10 million of projects lined up for the summer. And we have some exciting projects. I think Mrs. Gaiman was saying some of these are just not all critical, but not very exciting, these, right? And I'm pleased to say that, you know, as we look to the future and part of this budget discussion, we have a library, a really exciting project in the works for the library. Not long, immediately after completion of the library, I know the board is extremely interested, as is everyone, to have a look at how can we improve the auditorium, the space that we're in, you know, what options we have available to us, and how we might, you know, do some really cool things down the hall from the library after that project gets done. I should have taken this off. We were looking at the courts, but that was a topic at the facility committee the other night. Right, sure. Yes, right. And please jump in if there's anything here that you wish to say, right? And I put in expansion of parking lots. I just got an email today from a community member. I had a call from another one where really, since I've been here, people have been talking about, hey, there's just no place to park here. We need to improve that. And so that could be, again, a topic of conversation. And just because it's not on this sheet, there's a lot of other things that we may also wish to talk about, but we do it from a position of strength. And that's why it is an exciting conversation to have, right? Because there are things that we can now accomplish and that we have been accomplishing. So any questions on those three areas as to kind of what we've been doing presently with our funds? All right. Well, it was mentioned before, I forget your name, Jamie, right? That some districts, right, you have townhomes being built everywhere, enrollments going up. Many places in Pennsylvania actually are finding pretty steep declines in student enrollment. So looking at student enrollment over the course of time is a very important planning tool as far as a budget is concerned. And then related to that, to the extent that enrollment is exploding and staff members should be increasing in proportion to that, or to the extent that districts are decreasing, it would make sense that staff ratios would stay in line with decreases in student performance. So these are important metrics for us to look at as we do our planning, right? So I have a chart here, and I want to begin by emphasizing there were temporary hires in the midst of the pandemic, individuals that came on and left for under a federal grant, that it really was a time restraint thing. So in order to avoid ups and downs in this graph, I eliminated those altogether, right? And you could see that Southern Lehigh is blessed in a way, with, at least with respect to planning, of having a very steady enrollment over the course of time. And we could see that our professional staff numbers have pretty much stayed stable to reflect our enrollment, right? So we don't see spikes one way or spikes the other in either the enrollment or in the professional staff. And again, that's just context for us to consider, right? And then, another very important component that we have to consider is class size. And that is directly related to, students per teacher, but how does those students or teachers get pushed so that we keep class size reasonably low, or at least as low as manageably possible given our numbers. So I put together two looks at this, right? First, these are our average class size numbers across the district right now. You see, 22, 23 students, or 21, 22 students at the elementary level at Hopewell and Liberty Bell. I have a red mark over the intermediate school where class sizes are high. Right? 28 is a very, very high number. And we may wish to come back to that later in the presentation to talk about, what things we may wish to do to mitigate class size. And then, at the middle school, we see, low mid-20s for class size there. Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So we have, you've marked pretty clearly there's one place where we might have a larger class size than others. How much of that is solely a personnel issue versus how much this is a physical constraint of buildings, or is it a mix of both?
Well, in this case, as we look at that high number, it is strictly staffing. It has nothing to do with physical constraints in the building. If we had very high class size at Liberty Bell, for example, then we would be moving into physical plant issues or programmatic issues like art on cart and that kind of thing. But that is not the case in the intermediate school or the middle school. Okay. So these are the class sizes. Yes, Mr. Carney.
Besides class sizes, the classrooms, I assume you've looked at like special ed and like caseloads for special ed teachers
Yes.
and ESOL and
Yes.
those kind of things too.
Yes. And actually, we're going to get to a recommendation at the end where I'm saying we need another special ed teacher because of caseloads, right? For sure. That's exactly it. So this is helpful in that we see our student teacher ratios and our class sizes, but it's always, I think, valuable to look at how we're doing relative to external benchmarks, which I think was mentioned here before. So PSBA has a pupil staff ratio chart that they put out. And so they put out average class size by enrollment and by aid ratio. Aid ratio is a measure of the relative affluence of a school district, right? And so for a district, if you see in the first blue highlighted area, for a district with students from 2,528 students up to about 4,221 students, the average class size of the 100 school districts in Pennsylvania in that category is about 17.5 students per teacher. If you look at aid ratio, for districts that have an aid ratio of 0.42 or less, and we fall in that category, the student-teacher ratio is 11 students per teacher. If you take it all together and you see that the statewide average is about 15.2 students per teacher, and Southern Lehigh currently finds itself at 13.8 students per teacher. And again, this is context to look at the growth that we are having in our student population is very little. Growth we're having with respect to our professional staff, very little. And given those ratios, this is where we fall as far as this, which is roughly around state, not too far away from state average, just a little more comfortable ahead of state average. Okay. Any questions before we continue? Okay. All right. So looking ahead. So that was kind of where we were, where we kind of are as far as allocation of resources with staffing. And looking ahead, Southern Lehigh has ongoing initiatives, large and small, ranging from updating textbooks to consideration implementation of all-day kindergarten and a number of things in between. We are now positioned to consider how best to advance our mission through careful planning in the budget process. And Southern Lehigh is positioned to have optimistic and exciting conversations as we look ahead in planning and resource allocation. So the following slide, the one I'm going to get to right after this one, lists various programmatic and staffing additions, among others, for consideration. Our challenge will be to structure discussion among our board committees, our full board, our staff, and community, with the goal being to approve a budget that reflects the district's priorities in June of 2025. Okay. And then this pretty much the last slide I have here is a list of things for us to consider. It's by no means a comprehensive list. By no means are saying everything is recommended. And by no means, all right, is there things on this list that we need to change, right, or add? And so, at the top, we do have two matters or two line items that I think are very, very important, right? The first, and to Mr. Carney's point, we very much believe that we will have to add at least one special education teacher for the 25-26 school year, because we really need, we absolutely must comply with caseload obligations, and Mrs. Buckman has worked very hard to manage that, but we're short on staff, and so we'll need to do that. Also, and this is really no cost to the district, we will need to transfer 2 regular education elementary teachers from either Hopewell and Liberty Bell up to the intermediate school, because we have a bubble class that's moving from 3rd grade to 4th grade. We added those teachers in the elementary school. Now that bubble is leaving the elementary school, those teachers are not needed there, but rather needed at the IS, right? The next one, as you recall, I put a little red mark over the intermediate school, the 28 students per class. We may wish to consider 2 new regular education teachers to focus on class size reduction in the district, particularly at those areas where those numbers are high. We've also spoken about the possibility of a school counselor at the intermediate school where higher than level staffing ratios are in place, but I also note that we have a staffing review and a process review going on as far as our student services department, which includes our school counselors. We've also looked at an administrator for instructional technology. At one point, we had an instructional technology administrator, and should this position be added, it would be a restoration. The individual would support instructional technology and would also manage our student information system. Instructional technology coaches. This is something that often comes up. This would also be a restoration of positions. This would be support from professional staff at the high school, intermediate school, and middle school for work there. Media specialist. We are doing a library project, and I don't think anyone would be in a position to say you want to hire a librarian per se. It is fair to discuss the prospect of hiring a media specialist for that new space. Our special education and student services department is heavily taxed. It would make good sense to consider at least the addition of an assistant director of student services to support the work of our special education department and the many various tasks that they have going on there. We've looked at the idea of district-wide technicians and restoring some positions that had been cut in the past. Again, measuring the needs for those against alternatives. We are monitoring very closely early intervention numbers. That would be students who are coming into our district, the needs of students. We may have to come back to special education to say that we would have to do some additional hiring there. Professional development is always an important component of things we look at. New student clubs and activities. Our policy committee is working very hard on that issue, and we may want to put in some opportunity to expand. I have other there because this is not an inclusive list, and the slide is getting cut off here. And there you see, if you just kind of total it all up, the ones that we have there, that's a total of approximately 1.3 million, if you look at the grand total there. Okay. So let me go back. And so that really concludes the presentation per se, but my thought is that we would have, either now or in the future, a discussion of how we might best proceed with this process through the full board, certainly through committees of the board, through engaging stakeholders. I know we have the comprehensive plan discussion that's going on that might lend itself into some of this. So at this point, I'm just kind of going to pause and look for your insight and direction as the board.
I think first off, great presentation. It shows, where we are and future possibilities. And I would focus on the task of having, the forward-looking and new program situation here, which is good. I think it would be helpful, Dr. Mann, to just review the timeline from now until June, and maybe that's Mr. Pepe. He may have the key dates, but I think that would be important so that we can, so everybody's aware of the timing from now until June and the decision-making process for, let's say, these question mark areas in the presentation.
Right. And I'll defer to Mr. Pepe. In the end, we would need to have a final budget approved on by the end of June. And then we would want a preliminary or initial budget approved in May. But beyond that, Mr. Pepe, I'll certainly defer to your, because I know, and again, this is not in place of the process that goes on. This is in addition to, and Mr. Pepe has a very well-defined process that hears the voices of all in the district, state funding, subsidy, all that. So Mr. Pepe, if you want to talk about scheduling.
Thank you. First of all, the good news is we're early on in the process. We are just now starting to meet with administration throughout the district to get different area budgets and whatnot. But personnel is always a major component of any budget. And as the superintendent had stated, I look at things in terms of the Act-1 index, how much can we absorb? If the board decided that they wanted to add all of these positions, for instance, you're talking about $1.2 million. So then I have to go back and look at how does that fit within the construct of the overall budget? Because every year we have increases in salaries, we have benefit increases. We're financially positioned well. And if you remember, in November, we took action to say we will not exceed the 4.1%, I believe, is what the Act-1 index was. So we're currently at 17.25 as far as our millage. If we were to take that at 4%, for instance, that would be an increase to 17.94. So that just kind of shows availability of how much we can or cannot put into the budget. However, we'd be getting way ahead of ourselves, because what's going to happen, like every other district, superintendent has already started having these discussions. We'll continue to have discussions at the cabinet level. He'll continue to have discussions with the administration at each of the buildings, continue to look at the enrollment numbers to see if anything's changing, and continue to update the board probably through the ed committee as far as, what some of these positions look like. The tech committee would be a good committee for the instructional technology piece. And just like facility wise, if I had any issues with custodial or maintenance that I was looking to add into the budget, I would go to the superintendent and we would discuss it through the committee meeting. So given the fact that we already have the budget calendar established and we have, there will be a budget presentation. I will start on January 27th. We will also have a presentation on the 24th, and we will be framing the budget well before we get to a draft, so that the board is well aware of this particular thing that, Dr. Mann put out. One item on here, he has is like special ed teacher. He said that's required. So that is going to go into the budget. Where he has something that's optional, like for instance, 2 regular ed teachers at the IS. He's going to continue to have that dialogue and discussion and update the board. I just need to know, is it in or out of the budget overall? Once it's determined that, yeah, we really need that and that goes into the budget, that'll help me frame where are we, what can we absorb, and or, if we're already at our limit, then in order to add that, we have to take something out. Does that help you guys?
Thanks, Lou. Appreciate it.
And then Lou, with that presentation then at the end of the month, I assume, so this is a large portion, which is pretty much the largest portion of obviously a school budget. But at the end of the month, that presentation that you'll have, that'll also include a lot of the other work that's been going on. Even though we don't have complete numbers, we at least have some ballpark numbers to take into consideration for some of this new stuff.
Correct. And, I was happy that, we were already able to talk about, for instance, some of the facility needs, some of the projects are still going. Because when you finish out a year and you have about 5.6 or 5.7 million that we generated, that's great because the need's already there. If you look at the roof projects alone, that's about a $10 million expenditure. So those funds are going to get diverted to something that's already there. When we look at other things in other people's budgets, we'll get a better idea where we are overall. And, fortunately, we're in good shape, period.
I know from the, to tag on to what Mr. Boyer was saying, in addition to Mr. Pepe, the technology committee has also been making progress and has kind of those must-haves. And Mr. Flock, our new technology director, has been key in identifying those for the coming year. And we've started to have those discussions as well. And so some of that, I'm sure, can be incorporated into the 27th. But I think probably through those committees, we'll have to fine-tune. And education with staffing will have to go through this as well. And then we can bring those, because we've been doing that work year long. But thank you. I want to thank Mr. Pepe for talking to all those individual departments and Dr. Trinkle and Dr. Mann, because, like, for instance, I know last week, high school teachers who were given the opportunity to give their feedback about devices for the upcoming year and to give their feedback about what they think would be best. And so those are the kind of conversations that we want to continue to have with staff so that they can inform these budgeting decisions. And I think we made a lot of good progress in hearing that feedback from staff, at least from a technology perspective. And we're going to continue to hear back about those as you develop those from staffing and special ed. Actually, I had one more thing I took down my notes, Dr. Mann, when you were talking. It would probably be helpful either in the education committee or just for the board's understanding as a whole. I think your average class size was helpful. I know you and I had talked about getting a further breakdown to kind of, no big deal.
Yep.
In addition to that, the other thing, as I was looking at that data that might help us, the board, understand the needs of our students and our staff, is a breakdown of, from a special ed perspective. You talked about the early intervention numbers. Those are kids who, before they enter kindergarten, are kind of going up, and we can kind of see the trends of where those needs are before they enter kindergarten through the IU. If we could have a breakdown of just populations of what you're seeing in early intervention and any preliminary, knowing that when kids enter our system in elementary, we're obviously going to have more needs identified, but at least that gives us a ramp up. If we could have numbers of breakdown of early intervention, but also in our currently identified student population in special ed, of populations of IEP students, 504 students, even MTSS, even though I know it's not specifically, because that's going to give us an idea of our student population needs. And because we know those students are in our classrooms and teachers will need additional supports given those, concentrations of those students at different grades. So in addition to class size breakdown by class, like room number that you and I discussed, if we get a breakdown of like IEP 504, and if they're special, like behavioral versus autism spectrum support versus speech versus, if we could have that kind of breakdown so we can identify, because a classroom of 22 kids that has one IEP in it is different than a classroom of kids who has, 5 IEPs in it, or 504s or MTSS, because I know those populations are significantly changing in our schools right now. And I think that's kind of key. It's great that our populations are level and we can predict that with students and teachers. But if the needs of those kids are changing, that's something we have to look at. Sure. And as a board, I'd appreciate being aware of that. Thanks.
Of course.
I had 2 points. One, I appreciate the view from a programmatic perspective. I know that the district has worked really hard over the last several years to work on some operational pieces and some facilities pieces. And it's really nice to be able to talk about future growth and how we serve our district. I did have a question about growth. Ms. Calverley brought up a good point. It looks like our enrollment's pretty steady, and it has been steady for some time. I was curious if you could talk about how we are able to work with our supporting municipalities to understand how housing projects may affect us, 5 or 10 years down the line.
Yes.
That's not happening at all.
We talk about that all the time, Lou, if you want to.
Yeah, actually going to, as part of the planning component on the revenue side, I'm always looking to schedule a meeting with the township manager to make sure we're on the same page with any additional developments that are coming online, any businesses that are coming online. Even if they're out 2 or 3 years from now, we still want to make sure we're aware of it, because it helps us gauge whether or not our revenues will be shrinking or growing or staying, plateaued. I think I've reported out every year, we've been adding more and more homes, and we're certainly in a good position. As Dr. Mann said, some communities were actually losing their ratables. We have not. We have not only held steady, but we've been slightly going up, but we also have had a lot of challenges on some of the ratables from the COVID time. So we're still feeling that a little bit, and there's a little bit of ups and downs from that, but we do meet on a regular basis with the township for that. I would say on an annual basis in budget development.
Yeah, and I hop in a car and drive to some of these developments, and they're growing. Now it doesn't necessarily show up in our numbers yet, but if you just drive out and look at these places, I think it's going to. Right?
And some of them actually add to our rateable collection, but they're 55 plus communities, so they don't necessarily have a direct impact on adding additional students. That's something else to keep in mind.
I had this request from looking at the audit and things of that nature, but since we're
Give us
talking
1
about it
second,
now-
Mary Joy. Stephen's going to talk, and then we'll go
Oh,
to
I'm
you.
sorry.
I
Go
just
ahead.
heard her.
Mary Joy can go. I'll hold off.
Okay.
Okay, Mary Joy.
I'd like a little bit more information about longer term strategic planning and budgeting for longer term projects that have to do with facilities. For example, expanding the parking lot and solving the pickup and drop off situation and the parking for students who are often parking off site illegally. I'd like some more information on the cost strategically over time regarding full day kindergarten, the library project, and improving our theater program and our facilities. And I know that, our focus always has to be first on education and class size and making sure the teacher ratios are great. I think you've done a great job with that presentation. But I, as a board member, would like more information on the facility size in terms of growth and how we're going to manage that budgetarily.
Okay, very good.
I have one solution, and that would be to use our bus service much more, which I keep talking about. I say this in jest, but a little bit of truth in that. That would lower some of our drop-off pickup issues. It would reduce some of the parking issues. It would save emissions and gas and all that stuff. But that's just my opinion.
I mean, to that point, Steve, I know what I'm getting you for next Christmas, by the way. I'm getting you a school bus. But to that point, do we actually have an understanding at what's the underlying cause for that? Is it because maybe our bus services could be a little bit more expanded to allow for possible more use? Is it because our bus routes are too long and it's more cost effective for kids? That's option C. But do we really actually know what it is other than just what I'll say deferring and punting to kids just like to drive? Maybe it's the ease of accessibility that potentially could expand that use of that bus service. I'd just challenging if we really understand the underlying problem.
And
Can I speak
Because-
I've done quite a bit of research on this, and since COVID, parents are dropping off kids and picking up kids. Kids have after school programs, and kids also have jobs. And it's very frustrating because the school buses cost us a boatload of money for the taxpayers, and very few students that are taking buses anymore. My only point here when bringing up the parking issue is to expand the parking lots for the students who need to have access for extracurricular activities and to do the drop off and pick up more efficiently and safely. So that's what I was looking at, not looking at school buses, because that is just a huge nut to crack because it's humongously expensive. But my point was more about facilities and long-term planning regarding facilities operations and development, including what is the cost for the library? How are we rolling that out? What is the cost for building a theater program that's a little bit more robust without building a new building? I think we need to consider those things as well in terms of long-term planning strategically, in addition to short-term planning over the next year. That was my only point.
I mean, I would say as a member of the facility committee that, we're working on some of these numbers at this point. As a matter of fact, I think we'll be talking about
I have a number.
the library, right, which you have a number. And some of these other things are newer, but then also some things are complex and will require some sort of competitive bidding or some bidding or let's say budgeting by someone, whether it be our architect or engineers of record and things of that nature to formulate it. And it's going to take time to there. But I would say, I'll defer to Mr. Pepe. I would say he's probably got some timelines or things there as an idea of when he maybe have some of that information for the other newer things, right?
Well, I actually have a slide. I'm not done. Just don't tell. All right. But I have a slide after a slide. I have an encore slide here. But I will get to that.
So then the other part that I will say is, as we continue to meet with the facilities committee, we're always looking at the long range facility plan, and there has to be flexibility because sometimes the prioritization changes. A good point was on the slide where the superintendent had at one point, we were looking at the court at the middle school. And once we got the numbers in for what it would cost to renovate that particular area, and it was about $350,000 based on the need, it kind of fell to perhaps year 2 or 3. It's not something we're going to go out and do this particular summer. If you remember, when we met with EI Associates and we were looking at long range planning, we did a substantial amount of HVAC work, but there was a part 2 component to that. There was still a price tag of somewhere along 7 to 8 million, I think, that's still outstanding that we have not committed to yet because the roofing was more of a priority. So as you know, to Ms. Reinhardt's question, it's a great question. What we do is we start to assess throughout the district, where do we see any of the deficiencies, any of the concerns? Then we reach out to the architect to get estimates so that we know internally what kind of a number are we potentially looking at and how we could park it out, whether or not we can get another 5 years out of the boilers, then they wouldn't be in the 5-year cycle. If, we're kind of, hitting that question, and Mr. Rohrbeck can attest to this at, some of the schools, some of the boilers are aged. However, it's still more cost effective to retube one of the boilers than to, throw the whole thing out, because at this point, if we were to add a new boiler, all of a sudden now we're talking in millions, where if we're retubing, we're probably talking around 25,000 or something like that. So we're always doing that kind of cost benefit analysis through the architect. That long range plan keeps changing. As far as the cost impact of full day kindergarten, that has not been determined, but that's something that I know the Ed Committee is looking at. And then the facility committee would really only get involved if we're talking about space issues and we were talking about, do we need to put an addition on? So that, that's out there. I'm going to leave the library to the superintendent because he has the cost estimates we just received and I believe updated the facilities committee. We had our meeting and then the next morning we got the actual information we were looking for.
And that was just last week.
And
But
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think,
Thank you, Lou.
from Ms. Reinhardt's standpoint, I think what she's getting at is that there are question marks yet without numbers. And I think there's also not a complete list of this, let's say, wish list, I just to put it bluntly, right? So how much potentially are these things? And I think the point is that some of the question marks are still pretty new and we don't have the numbers yet, but we will be working on them. Is that correct?
That's correct. I didn't even hear about parking lots till tonight.
And actually, there's been a lot of discussion over the past couple of months. Good discussion, and I'm glad you keep bringing it up about busing. Perhaps that's something we need to look at a committee level, either facilities or education or a combination of the two, because things like, I know in the past when busing was assigned in the beginning of the year, we would get reports of how many students were assigned to a bus, and I know there was partially because of, you're right, Steve, like a significant portion of our students are
People
able
drop out after a week or
are
two.
able to be driven, but we count on that dropout. So for instance, I know historically elementary buses, my questions would be like, and I don't want to necessarily have to belabor this in a full public session, but I think it's kind of a committee workshopping or get the information, because historically I know in an elementary bus, how many students, when we assign it, how many students do we assign to that bus? Because it used to be we're assigning 3 kids potentially to a seat, because legally you can put 3 elementary kids, tiny heinies, right, on those seats. Not so at a high school level where you're putting 2 kids in a seat. But when you have instruments and bags and everything else, that's it. Like, what portion of our population is hauling, 3rd grade on a musical instrument with them? I know I had to drive my kids because they couldn't take their baritone or their cello on the bus, things like that. So looking at that kind of information of how many kids are we assigning to a bus? How packed would that bus be? Because maybe we are using it efficiently from a realistic standpoint. And also, how long are our routes? Because it's unsupervised time, and like that's part of the school day, and that's where a lot of classroom management or bus management issues happen. So perhaps if we can look at busing from the standpoint of cut the route, get fewer kids on the bus, what's the trade-off there from a financial, gas, et cetera? And I just think there's been enough talk. We should probably look at this from a committee perspective.
Well, yeah, it's a big can of worms.
Exactly. In addition
I've looked
to
at this now many times, and my goal when I bring it up is to motivate and suggest to the community that we have a busing service that we should take advantage of. That's my motivation for it. Whether or not we can modify how we're doing this, because they're very specific, and because I've looked at this, very specific requirements from a busing standpoint. It's either you do it or you don't, and you've got to cover various routes. There's a whole can of worms there. So my point is for people to take advantage of a service that cost, it's the high, what's our average number per month? And I don't remember, a couple 100,000 or more of expense for the school district for buses that are very underutilized, right? That's the point.
Yeah,
So,
and one of the things I've said in the past, because all your comments are very well taken, and all of that is happening, Madam President. The biggest problem is we are required by law to provide transportation unless the parent were to forego the transportation, and in a lot of cases that will not happen. So even though they may decide to bring their child to school and back, we still have to keep the seat. You see what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, and actually, to that end, it's actually a service that we're providing that it's an all or nothing, right? Like, so either we decide to bus any kids or we decide to bus none, and that's just not tenable for this district, really. Yeah, it's not a cut we're gonna make. Busing is not a cut we're gonna make.
You have with Lanta, right?
Right.
Lanta. I mean, I don't know if anyone looks at a bus driving pass, but there may be anywhere from 0 to 0 people on it sometimes, or 3 people. So they have the same challenge and want to be able to have access. I'm on the Bucks County Workforce Development Board. We had discussions, with SEPTA on this sort of thing in Bucks County, and it's the same issue. They're doing a pilot program on these micro routes, which is intended to have more, let's say, reactiveness to the population that uses the bus, but still have coverage and reduce the cost. So it's a problem everywhere. I just am motivating people. If possible, it makes sense to use the bus. It's there. That's all. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. And whatever we can give to whatever we can do to give them a positive experience, Steve. That's a good idea. All right, thanks. Moving you have one more slide. Actually, I would be remiss when I asked that special ed request. I realized I think of a classroom as a bell curve, and special eds are the 2 tails at the either end. I was focusing on one, and if we can also get data on those high flyers, be it through, accelerated performance on standardized tests or the gifted program or those accelerated needs as well. I didn't mean just to focus on a special needs perspective on one end of the bell curve's
Yes.
tail. Thanks.
Yes. And I do have an encore slide very quickly on unrelated topics to this presentation. Question came up. We did finally get an estimate on our library project, and it looks like about $1.6 million will cover the cost of the library. At our meeting in January, our regular meeting in January, we will be bringing to the board the approval of an agreement with Alloy 5, which is our architects. By all accounts, they've been doing a great job. And by approving this agreement, it would lend the board's endorsement of moving forward. And certainly, adjustments can be made. I think in the end, the number will more likely be lower than higher than there. We certainly can make adjustments with options going forward, but I think a very fair back of the envelope calculation is 1.6 million for the library project. We've mentioned junior high soccer, right? In our next meeting in January, we're going to consider the elimination of middle school co-ed soccer and the creation of junior high boys and junior high girls soccer teams. This is a direct result of action taken by the Colonial League to eliminate co-ed middle school soccer, which we currently have. And then, so this is kind of an issue that will be up for approval because we have to, if we're to create those two teams, we have to start making arrangements, our athletic department, to get them up and running and moving for which would be the fall of 25-26 next year. Okay. And then finally, the last thing I have is we'll be voting, I'll be presenting to the board for consideration a dual enrollment agreement with Kutztown University. I sent out an update on that. It will be, I think, particularly valuable for aspiring educators. It comes at a 75% discount in tuition, and it leverages some programs that we have going on here at the high school already for our students. So those three items will appear on the agenda, and certainly we can discuss them either, now, although time is, I've been here longer than I thought I'd be, or certainly, during the month, if there are questions, we can certainly try to address them. Okay. And then now, Mrs. Gaiman, I'm wondering, since our minds are all on budgets,
The audit report?
if we could move the audit report up
Yes.
now.
No one
and-
objects if we rearrange the agenda to move the audit report now, do they? No, that's absolutely fine, Dr. Mann.
Okay, all
That's
right,
great.
very good.
And
So Chris-
Mr. Pepe stepped out for a
Yes,
minute, so.
and so maybe I'll have Mr. Pepe, once he gets back here, I'll make him do the, I'll ask him to do the introductions. Okay?
Okay, great,
All right,
wonderful.
Chris, how's that? All right? Yes, come on up. Thank you and welcome. Thank you. Good job. Okay, thank you. And Lou will be right back.
Yep. No, he's fine.
Yes, feel free to adjust that
Yes, I'm a
as
little
need
taller
be.
than, yeah,
All right, great.
normal. All right. Good evening, members of the board. Thank you for having me. This is year 2 of the audit. We completed the audit back in, I want to say, God, for so long ago, back in end of October. Should have an audit report or a PDF in front of you. What I'll do is I'll go through, there's basically 3 reports in the audit report that I will go over, and then I'll kind of hit on some of the financial highlights in here. All right. Try not to take too much of your time here. On page 1 through 3 is our independent auditor's report. Right. Most important paragraph in here is the paragraph number 2. Right. In our opinion, the financial statements referred to above present fairly. Right. So 3 pages, that's all the sentence you guys need to worry about. All right. This is basically called an unmodified opinion. It's that simple, trust me. It's an unmodified opinion. It's a clean opinion. It means the financial statements are accurate. It's the same opinion that you guys have got in the past. The rest of this report kind of goes over what is manager's responsibility, what's Lou's responsibility to prepare the financial statements, and what is our responsibility as auditors when we do the audit. All right. Our second report is on page 4. This is our report on internal controls. Right? This report we use to, if we have any kind of internal control findings. Right? They're what's called, they have 2 levels. It's what's called significant deficiencies in internal control and material weaknesses. All right. One's bad, one's very bad. Right. These are basically internal control issues that if you had one of these, they would cause the financial statements to be wrong. Right. And you can see here at the very bottom of page 4, says, during our audit, we did not identify any deficiencies in internal control. So if we did identify those, they would be reported to you guys. All right. All right. That's not to say that, we still had some areas of improvement, recommendations. We're always making areas of improvement. There's always room to strengthen internal controls. All right. We've been doing another school district for 15, 20 years. We're still making recommendations for internal controls to strengthen them. All right. The last report in here is all the way in the back, and it's on page 79. This is our report on your single audit. All right. So if you guys get over $750,000 in federal grants, we have to call it a single audit. All right. It's a completely separate audit from your basic financial statements. It's part of this report, but basically they could be two reports. Right? And in here is where we audit your federal grants. All right. We audit the large programs. This year, again, just like last year, I think the year before that, we had to audit the American Rescue Plan funds. All right. I think you guys had about $2.3 million in federal grant expenses. About $1 million of that, a little over $1 million, was American Rescue Plan funds. So because of that, we have to go through and make sure you guys are spending those monies in accordance with the compliance of the federal grants. Right. And again, I'm happy to say, second paragraph, page 79, Lehigh, Southern Lehigh School District complied in all material specs with that grant. Right. So no findings or no internal control findings with how you guys spent those grant funds. Right. So those are our three reports. As far as the numbers, just go over the highlights. Again, I meet with Lou and his team and go over this report in a lot of detail. I could sit here for hours and go over this report, but I'll go over the highlights. Page 25 is basically your P&L, your income statement for your food service fund. You had an increase in net position in your food service fund of $282,000. Last year, that increase was $284,000. So almost very similar to the prior year. Right. If you turn to page 21, this is your income statement of all your governmental funds. Right. The biggest governmental fund is obviously your general funds. Right. And you can see at the bottom on the left-hand side corner here, you had a net change in fund balance, an increase of $5.8 million, which is what we saw. I think you had $6 million. But you had $5.8 million increase in your general fund, right? So your general fund balance went from 26.3 to $32.1 million. All right. If you look at the balance sheet on page 18 of your general fund, the very bottom there, of the $32 million in fund balance, right, $27.4 million is assigned. That basically means it's assigned for specific purposes, right? And then $4.7 million is unassigned, your free fund balance, right? And as you guys talked about with the assigned fund balance, 27.4, I think about 21.4 of that assigned is for capital related construction, right, Lou? Is that about right? 21 million? Okay. All right. So then when you kind of slap all those together, all your governmental funds, and you add all of your fixed assets, all of your long-term liabilities, all of your debt, on page 15, the very bottom, you'll see a total net position number. Right? Again, this is all of your long-term assets and liabilities. You have a total net position of negative $36 million. Right? Of that unrestricted amount of negative $54 million. Okay. Don't get scared. That is because you have the net pension liability and your OPEB liability is about $98 million. Right. So that's $98 million that is basically comes from an actuary that tells us what your net pension liabilities or OPEB liability. Right. So of the negative 36, 97 million is because of pension and OPEB related. Right. So those are the highlights of the audit report. You guys should have gotten a what's called a governance letter or a SAS 114 letter. Yep, we get it. Okay. This letter, the purpose of this letter is we're required to have certain communication with the board at the conclusion of the audit. The purpose of this letter is to go over with you guys. If we had any difficulties in dealing with the audit, we asked for stuff, they weren't getting it. Any disagreements, any journal entries we proposed, fixes that management disagreed with. And I'm happy to say, if you see in this letter in here, it says that we did not encounter any kind of difficulties in performing the audit. The audit went smooth. This is the second year, went even smoother. In here is also attached any kind of journal entries that we did during the audit. We had a lot of journal entries the first year, but we've made a lot of improvements with the financial reporting from year one. So thank you, Lou and his team, and thank you for having me. Does anybody have any questions on the audit report?
Yeah, on the general fund limits or recommended percentages of total budget, what is that number again? If you could refresh my memory from last year, what is the generally accepted percentage?
Is that, you talking about the unassigned?
Yeah, that's what he's talking
The
about.
unassigned, yeah.
Because that we're allowed to go up to 8%. We're currently at 6.5.
Right. So we're in good
So
shape there.
yeah, we're at 4.7
Yep.
mil.
And could you just clarify reasoning for that and why it doesn't move above those recommended numbers, just as a accepted principle?
That's more, it's not really, it's more of a budgeting and internal management. It's up to you guys. As far as a gap, it's not a required gap or accounting principle. It's more of a
Yeah, but from the
statutory and-
Commonwealth, though, are there
Yeah,
limitations, I think? Sorry about that. Yes.
most districts you'll find, Steve, that actually stay around that mark. You can go up to 8%, but you kind of are also looking at what kind of risks you're foreseeing and what kind of reserves you have in the rest of your budget on assigned. Obviously, the auditor is in tune, and we discuss where we're going and how we're putting the monies that are excess into those assigned, like the capital construction. He said it was about 21. It's 20,992,000. So he's good with his numbers tonight. The health insurance 2.9, OPEB we have 1.9 million in that, and retirement increase is 1.5. I reduced those pretty much based on our discussions of reality. So it's just like reality-based budgeting, reality with handling any of the balances. The district is pretty much run at 4 million in the unassigned, and that would be for anything that comes up. Like, for instance, we talked about transportation, or if we got hit after, post budget with something we couldn't reconcile by the end of the year, that's where the auditor is going to go to start looking at making sure that we're back to being balanced.
Right. And I think it's a little less than 8% for us because of our aid ratio, but the ultimate concern is that if we exceed the minimum amount as a percent in unreserved fund balance, we would be precluded from raising taxes in the subsequent
That's where I
year.
was headed.
Yes. And so if we were to exceed that number, again, it may not be as big a problem, but some, like, for instance, a district that kind of lets that get away, who really needs money at the end of the year, can get themselves, tied up with a problem. So we always want to keep that within the statutory framework so that we have flexibility as a board to do what it is we want to do.
And, just to tie this conversation off, one of the things that I find really interesting is I look at my footnotes, and we had this discussion back in probably October. And one of the things that is concerned that we are looking at is unbudgeted projects. And I have high school library question, because at that point we had no idea, or high school auditorium question, middle school tennis court. And that one we had close to an idea. We had 300,000, came back at 350, and full day K question. So this is the reason why boards hold X amount of dollars as unassigned, and that's pretty much standard or typical, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Thank you for that,
Yep.
everybody. But thank you for the work on this. I got through most of it, but were there recommendations, in fact, for the potential improvement areas that comparatively to what we've done before at this point?
No, and they're very minor recommendations as far as financial reporting, that kind of stuff. So nothing that would be close to severe to go over with the board.
Yeah, I think one of the points here too is that, in your overview, budgeted versus actual out of this year we were under budget by like $550,000 from what was budgeted. So that was part of the benefit here.
That's correct. And that's one of the things that we were very proud about, because we're not over budgeting and we are getting the expenditures our budget in line with the actuals. And that was one of our goals. So to finish within 1% on a $70 million budget is pretty good. So we were real happy with that. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank my staff, and in particular, my assistant, Shannon Williams, who spends a lot of time on the audit with his team. And they are, very detailed. It's a very rigorous process, but it gives us a high degree of comfort when we're done that things are where they need to be. And that's really why the auditor comes to report to the board, because the auditor works for the board, not for us.
Correct.
It's an excellent outcome. Thank you, Lou. Thank you, Auditor.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Thanks, Mr. Bentley. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
You don't have to, if no further questions, you don't have to stand there. I do. My next step here is to approve the audit report, but if there are no further questions, I'll move on to that
Thank you.
step.
Yep,
And
take
thank
care.
you.
Yep, yep.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Could I have a motion to approve the audit report for the fiscal
So
year?
moved.
Thank you, Mr. Mon.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Boyer. I heard him first. I'm just going to go with that. Appreciate it. No further questions, I assume. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, everyone. Now we'll go back to the original order of our agenda, which takes us to the curriculum and staff services. I have the Southern Lehigh High School Program of Study. Do we have a presentation on this? Someone prepared to speak? Yes.
Mr. Miller will be coming up.
I didn't want to put anyone on the spot, but I thought I saw Mr. Miller back there. So since we're talking about the high school program of studies,
Those attachments there was a change sheet that was sent out
Yes.
earlier. It's not extensive, so he's going to go over that right now
perfect,
for you.
perfect. And just so everyone is on the same page with the community, because this is a student item as well, we have a summary of a letter summarizing the changes in the program, which are minimal, and Mr. Miller will go over those, and also a draft of the program of study for the next school year. This is not something we're voting on tonight, but this is just a draft so the board can look at it for its voting meeting subsequently. So if you have any additional edits you can need to make, we understand that those are forthcoming. So the floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Good morning, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Sorry. Just to go over everything, just a key points for everyone with the updates. We do have a minimal amount of changes this year. The highlight focuses are that we are worked with numerous different departments to open our prerequisites to allow greater access for our students, and allow more students in grades 9 through 12 to actually take more courses and expand their opportunities earlier on in their career. I will say the only edit you should be expecting between now and the January 27th is the school profile on pages 1 and 2. We're still compiling some data. We will make sure that data is accurate before we publish it. These are items brought up by one of our parents earlier tonight that we be sending out with senior transcripts as well, highlighting what we do for our colleges when we work with them in terms of college applications. One of the highlight changes we did in the beginning section, which is everything that we cover in terms of our graduation planning, to our courses and process for parents to be aware of, and overall school general information, is page 11. We did update our graduation requirements. Over the past 3 years, I have heard consecutively from the board about our notice and our recognition of LCTI and everything our students do. We have taken our regular graduation requirements and split it into 2 main categories, showing what a 4-year high school student would have and what a 4-year LCTI student would have. We made some adjustments. We realized we were kind of constricting our LCTI students and not giving them more flexibility and not recognizing them for their dedication to a craft and a trade. So we did make some changes and put 2 different columns in. We made a high school only column to the left, and we made an LCTI column to the right. This will allow especially our 8th to 9th grade parents, when we meet in February, to get a real understanding of what their child would look like if they choose to pursue LCTI right away in their 9th grade year. In terms of page 13, as it's been a major focus with Dr. Mann and his mission. We have worked on expanding our dual enrollment and also our college credit programs. We were able to add specific information from RIT, which was the program we added last year, and some updates there. And the only thing that would be coming additionally after the approval would be the approved agreements with Kutztown University, Penn State, Lehigh Valley, as well, expanding dual enrollment for our students at the high school. And we're currently investigating a new agreement with Penn West University. This is an online asynchronous program for some of our seniors who have gotten much farther along in their career to give them more opportunities to earn other credits. Penn West, very quick summary, it'll come at a later time, partners with Cal University, Indiana University of Pennsylvania, and Slippery Rock, and allows our students to get state credit out there, but it's based off the Western side, but it's all asynchronous courses. In terms of our departments, as you can see, we didn't make any major adjustments to them. We did look through and make sure we refined some of our descriptions in English to match Study Sync, as this is our first year going through that brand new curriculum. We realized our initial descriptions were pretty accurate. We wanted to make them extremely accurate. We adjusted them with some minor pieces. We did open up AP Literature and Language so that it is 11th and 12th grade accessible, not 11th only for one and 12th for the other, to give students more flexibility based on our scheduling. We did remove creative writing from the English department. It had very low numbers. It was not a draw, but we did add the new course of Introduction to Film Theory. It was presented last Monday, January 6th, by Mrs. Pa.C., who wrote the entire course as an elective course. We think it's a great addition. It's something students will have a lot of drive and attention to, and it really covers a lot of new pieces involving media for students. In terms of our math courses, we just update some prerequisite information for our AB Calc BC class and computer science and statistics to allow more students access to those courses. And we've also taken economic apps of math and redefine that because we're accounting for the personal finance graduation requirement that is set to be enacted for the 26-27 school year. We're getting a jump on it early as part of the new graduation requirements. That course, when we looked at PDE and through the SAS website, met all of their requirements, which means we didn't need to create a new course. We could use an existing course to help match that personal finance graduation requirements. We did have to make an adjustment to college algebra and remove dual enrollment, only because else Tri-C changed what they were doing with that course, and it did not align to our current curriculum or our current pathway with involving college algebra. So we are reinvestigating how to add a new course. Science, we just add some more detailed descriptions to our biology courses, and we just update some prerequisite again to help students with their planning and course selection. Social studies, our only major change involves the 2-year cycle change of world, U.S. history, and civics and government that we discussed last year. For world language and health and P, there's no major changes. In terms of business, we were able to take financial literacy that was already a created course and also have account for the personal finance graduation requirement, therefore giving our students 2 options to get the course built in their 11th and 12th grade year and make sure that no one's getting left behind. FCS and music had no additional changes. Tech ed, we did continue to make some changes based off of what we were getting in terms of PLTW changes with computer integrated manufacturing going away, as it is a course that doesn't quite align and there's not a high number. But we were able to add 2 new elective courses for manufacturing processes and CNC manufacturing that are in-home courses developed by Mr. Hannaberry and Mr. Gogler that give students many access to what engineering could look like without having to do PLTW. And lastly, for our visual arts, we did expand to allow more students opportunities to take drawing and painting at an earlier time. And for photography, we just updated some descriptions to add more digital aspects. LCTI, we were kind of locked into what they give us, so we added those. And all of our course selection sheets at the end were updated so students have an easy way to make a 4-year plan.
Great. Thank you very much. I'll open the floor to any questions, but I just want to thank you for that. I know there's been a lot of attention over the years mentioning LCTI, the Lehigh Career and Technical Institute, and that's a great, easy change, low-hanging fruit to make it so much easier and more accessible. So thanks for thinking of that. Thanks for driving that. Any questions from the
I just
board?
want to acknowledge the staff and the administration for their now multi-year effort to have expand the dual enrollment programs. Affordability is a key factor, and for students to be able to have the opportunity at a very economical number, be able to earn college credits while in high school and get that advantage is critical. And I commend everybody for expanding that to different educational institutions because of things like transferability of credits, which is a challenge sometimes with this. The more choices that are available, the more opportunity there are for students to have something that is useful when they do transfer into college and be able to take advantage of that. So thank you very much for that. I think it's great. As well as some of the additions in the program. I significantly appreciate some of the expansions and as Mia being a STEM-based professional, I like the idea of being able to have these introductory courses, even though sometimes the student has no potential interest or time to go, for example, to LCTI. It's a complementary opportunity that I think is important to have for different program and scheduling for that student. So thanks.
Not a problem.
Mr. Carney.
I just want to mention that we had the instructor and developer of the program for the intro to film. She spoke at our ed committee, and her enthusiasm is contagious. And it just sounds so, it sounds like such a neat program talking about careers, and it fits our standards, presentation skills, language and writing, team building, media literacy, music, business, leadership. It was just an exciting thing to hear about.
Yeah, I just want to kind of echo that. In addition to that, we're really lucky here at Southern Lehigh to have high school teachers and teachers throughout the district, but we're highlighting high school tonight, that write curriculum and drive curriculum. In our technology meetings, there were a lot of discussions about, well, we have unique programs here that were written by teachers that, take some of those STEM and STEAM and literature courses to the next level. And I just want to thank our staff for continuing to write that curriculum for us, to tailor it to what our kids really need in the classrooms, and for the teaching and learning department who works with them and encourages those efforts and makes it easier to do so. So kind of tagging on to what Mr. Carney said about Ms. Tossi and the new film course. Thank you. Mr. Boyer, did you?
I was just going to say, I mean, to be fortunate enough in Southern Lehigh, a lot of times you see in public education, you see the factor of getting stale, right? And in Southern Lehigh, it's nice to have that opportunity. And I don't know if folks really truly appreciate the ability that their kids have with the staff and with the support of the folks in the district to look into. This is not the same way that we did math in Coach Greenwald's class back in 2007. I just see that because he's back there. But like we're changing things when Steve talks about STEM and the opportunities. It's not the same tech classes that I had the ability to take when I was in school in 2007 through 2009, right? Mm-hmm. And to have that ability for new things, we talk about the film theory. You have that ability. You not only do you create a more expansive culture for the folks that work here because they're excited and they like doing what they do in the profession, but you also change that culture for the students in the school because now it's fun. Learning is fun, and it should be fun. It shouldn't be that I have to do it. It should be because I want to do it and I want to learn new things. So I think that's a lot of things that folks need to really understand, that here at Southern Lehigh, a lot more opportunities than other school districts in the state. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. I just want to highlight a community member's comment earlier, of which I've had in the past, and that is the level of, let's say, matriculation from the high school level into some of the more competitive university settings. And I think there's some challenges there. I just want to reiterate that. And I think it's something somehow probably more within the guidance department. We could make take a look at that and see how we can improve the ability of, let's say, higher performing students and having those higher goals to be able to do that matriculation and in a little more, let's say, common way rather than it being so obscure.
before we move on, I want to make sure that I thank Lauren Tossi for her presentation at the Education Committee. She wasn't able to be here tonight for another commitment, pretty important commitment, but I wanted to publicly thank her for her time and dedication to completing that course. It does look really exciting. So.
All right, thank you. We're not looking for a vote on this tonight, but we will be at the next. Yes, one moment, Mary Joy. We're going to mic you up. Just 1 second.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I would like to thank Mr. Miller for an excellent, succinct, robust presentation. I'm all about kids getting education for careers that produce a marketable skill. And I think that the efforts he has put forth to build that at Southern Lehigh is awesome. So I just want to thank him for the presentation and all of his efforts to build a curriculum for high schoolers that will actually produce an economic income going forward. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you very much. Appreciate the presentation, Mr. Miller. Yeah. All right, moving on to, it helps if you leave your reading glass. All right, that's better. Moving on, could I have a motion to approve the AP Statistics Textbook recommendation?
Motion.
So
Thank you, Mr. Carney, and thank you for the second, Ms. Reinhardt. I understand Education Committee discussed this and is recommending it with the administration to the board. Any questions on this at this time?
Just a comment.
A comment, Mr. Carney? Yes.
Various resources were looked at, updated. This is an updated version of the one that we're already using. The old version is about 10 years old, and I did look into it, and that's about the time that you start replacing, you look at replacing. The teachers that looked at it, or the teacher that looked at it, like the new online interface, and they're looking at a 6-year quote, which was attached. We unanimously made a motion to approve.
Thank you, Mr. Carney. Yeah. Recommendation from the committee. Great. All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. All right, moving on. We are skipping over the budget and finance because we have already covered everything under that category. Moving ahead to human resources, could I have a motion to approve the sabbatical leave?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Boyer.
Second.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Ms. Cruz. All those it's an employee item. I'm not going to ask for questions or comments. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. No, we do not. Thank you, though. But call me, especially when we're skipping around. I've been known to miss one. No, thanks. All right, moving on. Committee reports. We covered a lot of committee business tonight. I know the policy committee is meeting next week. We had to postpone our meeting by a week, so we had a more productive meeting this coming week. Any other? And I know we've talked a lot about facilities tonight. We've talked a lot about education tonight. Anything else to add to our committee reports?
I think just the one thing that I wanted to bring up in regards to facilities. So I do know there's a lot of public comments. So for those folks that are out there or in person here that do talk, or we do see things on social media, and we do bring those up to the attention, whether it's through social media or whether it's through email to administration or the board. One of the things we heard loud and clear through multiple channels was the concern about radon. So we did talk about that in the facilities meeting. Southern Lehigh does, I'm just going back to my notes, does have record for every 4 years intervals for doing radon testing in all buildings here in the district. We did discuss, we are going to be getting quotes and looking at performing that testing again. It's been done every 4 years, 2017, 2021, this is 2025. So we're in that 4-year swing. So we are proceeding with moving that forward. So you should see that for a future update, potentially maybe even here, Lou, at the end of the month, maybe?
No,
We're
looking to schedule the testing.
No, the approval, I mean,
The
proposal.
once we get it all, since we're going to do it in June, it'll probably come closer to March.
So coming to a springtime near you. And then just, so we did talk about library. We had a lot of great in-depth conversation about the library. I think I'd be lying if I said I was the only one. I think a lot of us were a little bit surprised by price tag. So we're going to look at that a little bit more and see what we can do. in terms of the library. And then the other thing that we did talk about was middle school. There's a lot of folks that are, sorry, not the middle school courts outside of the middle school. So there has been a lot of conversation about what we want to do with that space. It is outdated. It is a little bit run down. However, in terms of mitigation for any kind of safety hazards, our facilities department and Mr. Rohrbach back there have taken proper measures to make sure that that's in proper condition, at least for now in the time being. However, we are putting that into the roadmap at looking into potentially repurposing that space for use for community, also for use for education, for the middle school gymnasium or the folks in the gymnasium, and then also our athletics department too for possible use of that space. So there'll be more conversation for that. We were originally looking at potentially doing that here in the summer, but as with everything coming up, as with some staffing changes and stuff taking place, and as with looking into budgets, we are now looking at probably putting that project into potentially for next year type of thing. So we probably are not going to proceed with that. However, we'll have further conversation with our next facilities update now that we have some information for the library in terms of how we want to juggle or do some of these projects moving forward. And then obviously we've all seen that the latest thing in the community has been about the parking lots and the parking spaces. So that'll be a future thing that we'll talk about at our facilities meetings moving forward too as well.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. I'm glad you mentioned the radon. Thanks for bringing us that update. And we're on track to do that this spring and summer, over the summer. Yes, Mr. Carney.
Okay, ACMC met in December and again in January. We approved about 3 people. Our next meeting is February 13th. This is not really a board committee, but the Comprehensive Planning Steering Committee met on Zoom December 16th. The draft plan is planned to be shared in February at the Ed Committee. Another online meeting is planned for February 18th. The plan is due March 31st. Ed Committee, we talked a lot about full day K. There's been 2 meetings with Alloy, including sharing of data, building visits January 17th and January 20th, and then bi-weekly meetings occurring after that. Library renovation, I won't talk too much about that, but there's been meetings going on with stakeholders. Staffing was discussed, but that was shared here. The elective intro to film, I want to sign up, but I can't. Steel science is going to be big. There's a possibility of up to 11 new resources needed. Elementary is in good shape, but there's other resources being already discussed by different stakeholders for that. AP stats was included, student devices already taken care of. 2025, we're looking at elementary math, social studies, Spanish immersion, world languages, and steel science is going to be a biggie. As far as LCTI, we met on December 11th. Guidance counselors from sending schools meet twice a year for OAC student service meetings, and they met on October 19th. First year having therapy dogs once a month. They visit, students can either sign up to meet with the dogs or other dogs roam around the building. So that was pretty neat to hear about. Sending school guidance counselors meeting is held 3 times a year. It was held in November and again in January. NOCTI testing begins in March. May 29th is when LCTI's moving up event will be held at PPL. Our next meeting is January 22nd. January 22nd is also Skills USA at Ag Hall. I'll be attending that at Ag Hall on January 22nd. Early priority deadline for students wanting to apply, the deadline is March 1st. So anybody interested in classes should sign up before then to get a better chance at first choice. We were shown a quick demo of a Pocket Talk translator device. And we also saw a digitized cadaver table. Some people were more excited about that than others. The budget was not presented yet. It'll be at our next meeting, they said. There was a second annual college fair that ended. 9 schools showed up. 132 students participated. Just wanted, lastly, for LCTI to congratulate Ian Lang. He came in second place and will compete this spring at the state level. And then some of students from Southern Lehigh that were inducted into the LCTI National Technical Honor Society. 118. The Fernandez, and I totally slaughtered that name. I'm sorry. Last name is Fernandez. Isaac Hernandez, Haley Schumacher, Samantha Shelton, and Daniel Toto. So congratulations to those people for being inducted into the Honor Society.
Thanks very much, Mr. Carney. Any other committee reports? I think that concludes those. We have new
Mrs.
business.
Damon, I just want
Yes.
to point out,
Dr. Mann,
missed this note,
absolutely.
the middle school robotics team in its first year finished 3rd out of 31 teams in a competition on Saturday, exceeding all expectations and finishing well ahead of teams with many more years of experience.
Wonderful. Thank you. That's great. Thank you for that. All right, so that fits under new business, I guess. Any other any other new
That was
business?
skipped superintendent report is what
Okay,
that was.
all right.
Yes.
Any other new business? Yeah, yes, one moment. We'll mic you up, Mary Joy. Just give us a pause. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Tim, I was just concerned and curious about the LCTI budget and when they're prepping that and how that has an impact on Southern Lehigh and how that's going. If you can give an update maybe at the next meeting, that would be helpful.
Yeah, that they're in the process of adjusting the methodologies for budgeting and addressing some accounting based challenges, I will just say, with general ledger accounts and things of that nature to get cleaned up before the audit. And then also with regards to that, there is a superintendent's group that works with LCTI administration to investigate in detail and recommend in detail ways to better budget and utilize previous history to improve the budgeting process. We are, I will say, and I mentioned this in the public session at the board meeting, we are one of only, I believe, the only school district that is not in a significant tax increase arrangement. They are, I think, at this point, looking at increasing their portion of our budget, but out of the 9 school districts, I believe we're the only one that is in the very low tier, if maybe even not a tax increase. I'm not going to comment on that until we get through our budget process, but it's an important point, I think, to make to the public. Some of these school districts are 4% up at the limit in the 3%, 2, 3, or 4% increases on their annual budgets. And so the concern, I think, in general is, with the increases from the LCTI budget, how will that affect and will those things be reconciled in a way that's amenable to the 9 school districts? So they're working diligently on that. I don't know if there's anything to comment there, Dr. Mann, but I think in generalities, without getting specific, that's about where we are.
No, thanks. And I also think, correct me if I'm wrong, that the part of that LCTI, the technical school funding, the formula is based on the more students we send, the higher our fee is. Isn't there some portion of so in a way, if we have an increase, some of that's due to increased utilization of our student population, which is a good thing. But I know not the entire thing, but am I correct in thinking that as well?
We are. It is a tuition based. So
Tuition
definitely
based.
as
Okay.
our number goes up,
Yes.
We would hope that we want our numbers to go up. We want our
Right.
tuition rates to go up.
Right.
The issue is the per pupil cost.
Right. The
is
increase
thing.
of tuition is what needs to be addressed. However, the more students we have attending, obviously, the higher our tuition from Southern Lehigh paid to LCTI for those educational services is. Okay, great.
That was not my point, was, the increase about student participation, but really the LCTI budget itself and how they're managing their own budget with, increases that get passed on to the district per student. So that was my concern. And I was also curious, Steve and Tim, if you know that they hired a CFO.
There are recruitment activities right now happening.
Thanks.
Yeah, and Ms. Reinhardt, I didn't mean to imply that was your concern. I was just kind of also stating that kind of for the edification of the population and ourselves. That's all. But yeah, I understand your concern in controlling costs. It's valid. All right. Any other yes, Mr. Carney.
I had like some endnote kind of things.
Sure. Go ahead.
Okay,
Yeah.
And also, MJ, we'll have more information. We have a meeting before the next board meeting, so we'll have more on the budget for the next board meeting for LCTI. Okay, no problem. I just want to thank Mr. Loda and the middle school band. They put on a fantastic holiday concert that I got to participate with. So I had a fantastic time, and thanks for the invite. I just want to pass on two things that came up. I saw some research this week. Schools should partner with community-based health services to address the increased demand for youth mental health supports, according to a report last week by the Bipartisan Policy Center. The reason I bring it up is because this report recommended that education institutions add crisis line resources to student ID cards so that information can be easily accessible. So I know, so I'm getting chills. So thank you very much for everything that we did and making that happen. The other thing was—
Thanks for bringing it to our attention, Mr. Carney.
The other thing was full day K. There was a recent Brown University study found expansion of full day kindergarten programs make it easier for mothers to work while boosting academic outcomes for young children. Full day kindergarten has become the normative kindergarten context, with more than 80% of kindergartners now enrolled in full day kindergarten. So again, I thank everybody for doing what we're doing so far. The feasibility study is on track, and we'll see. As far as MJ asked about costs, it all depends on space and if construction's needed, how much. So right now there's a big question mark for a reason. But thanks for the work that we've done so far looking into it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I think that brings us to our second visitor comment period. I'm going to admit that I'm having technological difficulties with my laptop. So if you did sign in to speak, could you kindly raise your hand, because I cannot see the sign-in sheet. I didn't see anyone. I don't believe we had any visitor comment last I checked. I don't think we do. All right, wonderful. Thank you. So we have no visitor comment for the second period, in which case I will thank you for everyone for your attendance this evening. It was a great productive meeting. I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you all for coming out. We really appreciate it. Good night. Have a great night. Safe travels.